everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer. And if you don't know ThinkerThemer because you've hit this video because it says Pokemon in the title, well, we are a board game review channel.
Yes.
And we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics, Maggie's all about the theme. But this video is something different. So if you do watch the channel, you're probably going to be quite surprised that Maggie and I have spent the last 4 months down a rabbit hole.
Deep rabbit hole
That you might not know we have been doing, and that is the Pokemon TCG. So
what have we done?
What have we done?
Yes.
We wanted to create a video to tell you about our experiences because we are not TCG people. We have never been.
No.
And the idea of a head-to-head battle, you know, we play a lot of board games that are head-to-head.
Well, and I'm usually like, oh, I don't know. And somehow, you know, this happened.
So we want to tell you about how we got into it, a little bit about how it plays from a board gamer's perspective, and then just all the things that you can see here, where we're at with it now.
There's a lot.
So why don't we start with how we actually got into this?
All right. So how we actually got into this is because a friend of ours reached out to us saying, hey, I'm really feeling like I want to get into a trading card game. I want to rip some packs. What would you recommend? Because, you know, we're known for being like the gamer couple. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, we don't actually do TCGs. Like, we don't really ever play any TCGs. I'm like, let me do some research and see what I might be able to recommend. Also knowing that this is probably, he won't have anyone else to play it with. So it's like, it's something that I have to also be a little bit into. And so I looked at obviously Pokemon, I looked at Magic the Gathering, I looked at, what else? I looked at Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Lorcana obviously is very kind of prominent at the moment, particularly in the board gaming world, because it's quite a new one. One Piece as well, Flesh and Blood. So there's quite a lot of fairly big and fairly well-established TCGs. And of all of those, I'm not into fantasy, so like the sort of, you know, powers and mana and like kind of like that immediately, I was like, not as much into that. So that kind of ruled a lot of them out. Yu-Gi-Oh, Digimon, all of those ones, I didn't grow up with those, that IP. So, and I was like, Pokemon, we actually were into Pokemon Go.
And who got us back into Pokemon Go? This same friend who is actually like I think he's like level 41 or something in the Pokemon Go game. So he's still quite into it. And so that seemed like a natural place to start.
Like, let's just try Pokemon. Like Pokemon, because I already know some of the creatures, and I never actually even watched Pokemon the IP growing up either. So I was like, but I know it from Pokemon Go. All right, let's do it. And so that's how I started. Like, I started doing some research, watched a lot of different videos of like how to get into it, what to start with, and there is a lot out there, and a lot of very confusing information. And so we decided let's just start with an ETB.
One step in between. Maggie said, "I'm just going to drive our friend to the shop to help him purchase some Pokemon TCG cards," and I said, don't you come home with like any stuff for yourself. So this was when she was just saying she was helping our friend. And I was like, I feel like that's going to be a deep rabbit hole. And as soon as I got home from work, I looked on the table. And of course, there was this ETB, which is
an elite trainer box, which you see actually many of them around here.
Many of them around here. We'll get to all the stuff.
They reproduced. It started with one and then they reproduced.
Yes. And actually, that's not even the best way to get started in the hobby, probably. But it's really hard to figure your way through this hobby. And anyway, let's continue with how we got started. So Maggie has purchased this single box. And then as the weeks go on, Maggie's collection is getting bigger and bigger. I remember I was actually talking to someone, another friend, about it. And I said, well, at least they don't take up as much room as board games. I said, because Maggie only has one box. And I turned to where the one box was, and for some reason there were 3 boxes. And I was like, wait a second. Maggie, what has happened?
It's just like plants. You water them a little bit and then they just sprout and they grow.
Yeah, and so then of course I was like, well, I'm interested. And one thing Maggie did that I feel like was a really strategic move on her part was she knows that I love the thrill, the little bit of, I'm not a gambler, but I do love the little bit of a thrill. Like if we're in Vegas, I might like walk past and you know, use a pokey machine, or if there's a big wheel somewhere.
If
like,
you're in any kind of convention, so it could be a board game convention, it could be a dog show convention, it could be anything. If they've got one of those little spin the wheel
Prize
and win
wheels.
some kind of crap, like, because it's usually just like a whatever, nothing. Amy cannot resist.
love
She cannot help herself.
I love a game of chance.
Yeah.
And so Maggie knew this, and strategically, whenever she was buying something new, she had me rip open the packs. And so this started as just like oh yeah, sure, I'll rip open the packs for you. But then inevitably...
Because you have the better luck.
Yeah, sure.
You have the better, you know.
You see, she's manipulative. And so persuasive. And so I was ripping packs, and inevitably I was sometimes hitting a really interesting looking card.
Known as pools.
Yes.
A pool is
Yeah.
when you get a really, really cool card.
Yeah, so I would pull a card and it would look fantastic because, side note, the artwork has actually been improving over time, and the artists that they get involved
Yes.
are really incredible.
And I love that every single card has the artist on it. And so I've gone on like little Googling things and they've got like exhibitions and like their own sort of full books. Incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not even into Pokemon that much. My sister was actually really into Pokemon growing up. And so I kind of know a lot of the original Pokemon just from being exposed to it. But you know, this artwork was just so incredible. Like the way that they've put the Pokemon in different situations, and it's just really lovely. And so I was pulling these beautiful cards. I was like, how much is this card worth? And that's where the rabbit hole began for me, because I have a very research orientation.
Yes.
Obviously, that's why, you know, we're in board games. And I just love learning more. And so I went down the rabbit hole of understanding how cards are valued and how people collect, and then an interesting world called poke investing,
Yes.
which is a whole other part of the hobby, which are people who do not play the game. In fact, what's interesting about this TCG, and maybe other TCGs, but particularly Pokemon, is that most people do not play the game. Most people are just purchasing cards to collect, and that's because there's this idea that the cards go up in value, that you can make these great pools, and so a lot of people are treating
some people
this...
just like the cards, like particularly with kids, like they get a pack and you get a Vista pack and you're like, oh, look at the different Pokemon that I got.
Yeah, but there's this idea of poke investing is treating it like a share market, an extremely volatile share market.
Yes.
But there is a lot of content, especially in the YouTube, in the YouTubes,
we're showing our age.
about the cards and what people expect to go up in value, and about the new sets, etc., and people also buying product just to keep and hold sealed.
Yeah.
So it's one of those rare products that the longer it stays on shelf, the more valuable it becomes.
In theory.
Yes. In theory. But for the most part, that is
so
true.
Far, yeah.
And so people just buy it to hold it, and they don't open it, and they just resell it at a later date when that product has gone up in value. So that fascinated me. I've collected many things in my life. I've collected coins and other little things. I was the kind of kid that would keep my toys in pristine condition just so I could look at them. So I am a collector at heart, and so it just really intrigued me. So that's where my journey started.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Maggie continues playing with our friend.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm now like with our friend, we're like, okay, well, let's try and play the game, learn the game, and so it actually is quite a tricky game to learn, even though it's very simple. None of a rule book would be really, really helpful. And most of the products don't have a simple, this is how you play it. The best way to learn it was through watching, I think it was like 20-something 1-minute videos on the actual official Pokemon website, where they break it down like one element at a time. That was actually quite helpful.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be that hard of an entry, which probably shows how much of this is like not
Collecting.
really, it's more the collecting than it is the playing.
Yeah, but Maggie and our friend, they were playing all the time, and this is a friend that usually comes over to play board games, and so of course that meant I had to be busy doing other things.
Yeah, because it only plays 2 people. It's a head-to-head, and
Yeah, and then I would be listening to their conversation and be like, yeah, I wasn't really drawn into playing. And in fact, at one point I said to Maggie, I'm going to maybe dabble in the collecting of the cards. Every time you pull something that's not for playing but for collecting, I'll put it in my album. And that's the way that we'll continue in this hobby. But then what happened was Maggie would constantly be sad when our friend wasn't around that she really wanted to try out something she'd changed in her deck and wanted someone to play against. And so just one day she was like, please, when you play, just play one little game with me.
It's very, very simple. It's just one game.
And I think
going to be able to.
I think it was late at night.
And it was two. And then Amy was like, no, you've probably optimized your deck and you're going to destroy me. I'm like, no. I actually had two build and battle decks, so like already pre-made decks, and that they were just like slightly different. So it's like we were starting straight from the pack. Like there's no tampering that's going on. So you can just play those two and see how you go.
Anyway, so I was like, okay, let's give it a go. Because I felt bad because it is a two-player game. You can't play it solo. Maggie would normally play it solo. So
you can online, but it's like I'm not interested in playing like on the digital kind of platform.
So anyway, so we gave it a go, and then I was like, actually, this is kind of interesting. And then I think I won a couple of times, and of course, I was like, that wasn't the worst game I've ever played. And I have to say, I have played Lorcana, and I didn't enjoy it. So it was also surprising to me that I liked Pokemon. I think part of it was probably I was more into the Pokemon IP than I am into Disney, but it was also kind of some of the mechanics, which I'll talk about in a moment, which are very easy to grasp because Pokemon is, of course, geared at quite young children.
That was the other thing,
40-year-old adults.
People that are 25 years late to the IP. So that was part of it. This is kind of similar to Magic the Gathering because my understanding is it was Wizards of the Coast that did the original kind of design and had the first few runs of this. But this is a much more simplified version. I'm like, I like that because I'm more into just like the collecting initially. Yeah. So it is quite a streamlined overall rule set.
Yeah. So, and speaking of rule set, we are going to do a really brief rundown now of how the game plays. If you know how to play the Pokemon TCG, you can just skip ahead because we've got a lot more to talk about our journey, all the things we've purchased, and what we're going to do next. So if you want to jump ahead to that, please do so. Otherwise, if you've never played the TCG, I'm just going to give you a quick explanation of how it works. So when you sit down to play, you both just have a single deck of cards. This deck of cards consists of 60 cards of your choosing with a couple of rules. There are some special cards that you're only allowed one of in the deck, but for the most part, you can have the same card in there up to 4 times. So the maximum amount you can have of any like Pokemon or item or supporter cards is 4 cards max, with the exception of energy cards. Energy cards are the life force in the game that are going to power up your Pokemon. You can have any number of those and they come in many different types. A game is typically played in 3 rounds and it's the best of 3. So the first thing players are going to do is they're going to draw 7 cards from their shuffled deck and they're going to look at those 7 cards and ensure that they have a basic Pokemon in hand. So this is the least evolved version of a Pokemon. And why that's important is because you need to place out that basic Pokemon face down to show that you have one, because that is going to be the first Pokemon that's in your active position. If you do not have a basic Pokemon in hand with that first draw, you're going to shuffle that back in, redraw 7 cards, and your opponent as a bonus gets to draw another card into hand. And that is really important in this game, is to always be drawing from your deck so that you can get the things that you need to get started quickly. Once both players have a basic Pokemon, they're then going to take the top 6 cards of their deck and put them aside as prize cards, because one of the win conditions in this game is to essentially get all of those prize cards up into your hand, i.e. if you've knocked out your opponent's Pokemon enough times to be able to collect these prize cards, then you're going to win the game. But there's another way that you can win this game, and that is if your opponent gets all the way through their deck and they can't draw up at the start of their turn. And the final main way to win is if the opponent has no more Pokemon available to them in the active spot or in their bench. So what is bench versus active Pokemon? So the key part of this game is to place down Pokemon that you're drawing out of your deck and you can place them down so long as they are basic Pokemon, and you can put them down here onto your bench with a typical maximum of 5 in the bench position. That is, they are kind of just waiting to be chosen to go up and battle, and 1 in the active Pokemon spot. And for the most part, you are trying to battle between you and your opponent's active Pokemon. For most Pokemon, in order to use their attack, you're going to have to equip energy, and for the most part, you can only attach 1 energy per turn. However, your supporting set of Pokemon that are sitting on your bench often have abilities too that work when they're on the bench. So you're looking for an optimal combination of Pokemon that are going to help you quickly defeat whichever Pokemon your opponent has. Every Pokemon has an amount of health points, and as a Pokemon gets attacked, you're going to be placing damage counters on them to show that they are getting more and more damage. And of course, when your damage meets or exceeds their health points, then that Pokemon is knocked out and goes into your discard, and then you need to choose the next Pokemon to put into the active position. Now, I won't go into all of the rules in more detail, because the thing about this game is that there's so much customization with the deck that you are going to construct. But there are some key types of cards that are going to help you get through. For example, one card that I've played here is a stadium card, and a stadium card is like an event card that everybody gets access to once per turn. So it does something, but that something is going to apply to both players. So sometimes it can stop particular powers of certain types of Pokemon, allow you to draw more than you can usually draw. And usually you play it even though it's going to benefit the other player, because it has some kind of power that uniquely benefits the deck that you've constructed. Also, there are other item cards that you can collect. For example, this is a rare candy, and a rare candy allows you to skip a level of evolution because just like in Pokemon, the IP, all of the Pokemon evolve and get more powerful. So you start by placing the basic Pokemon down on the bench, as I've mentioned, and then you're going to be able to evolve it by placing a stage 1 Pokemon. And then you can evolve it again to a stage 2 Pokemon. But for example, an item like Rare Candy allows you to skip stage 1 and go straight from basic to stage 2. So that's a very helpful item to have. And there are many, many other items, but there are also supporters. So by way of trainers. So the trainers in the IP come to life as supporters that you can play, and they give you really powerful abilities as well to use generally as a one-off. But you can only play 1 of those per turn, so you have to think carefully about which one you want to play from your hand. And outside of your opponent trying to knock out your Pokemon, there's also some conditions that can happen, like you can get poisoned or confused or burned, and that's going to have different impacts on what your Pokemon are able to do. So here's the deal with how it feels to play this game. Firstly, of course, the choice of the cards that you put in the deck is incredibly important, and it's very personal. So people are going to create their own decks, and you don't know what you're playing against. And there are also certain types of Pokemon. For example, this is a very water Pokemon focused deck, but you don't know what the other player is going to play. And sometimes the different types of Pokemon have weaknesses to other types. And so it is a real surprise when you go into battle someone, especially if you're battling a stranger. The other part of it is even though you could create a super powerful deck, there is a huge amount of luck that's involved, because firstly, you are removing 6 cards from your deck. And those are going to be prized cards. And as you defeat your opponent's Pokemon, you're going to be able to draw those into your hand. But if there's something really important in there, well, you don't have access to it.
You also don't know what it is.
And you don't know what it is.
Because when you put them there, you don't get to see what they are.
And there are some item cards that allow you to pull things out of your prize cards. But for the most part, they are kind of separated. And then there's further luck involved. Like, what is the first hand of cards that you draw, and how useful is that to start your engine going? Because in this game, you need to get whatever engine you have designed up and running really quickly, which is really a challenge, and that's the key challenge in the game. The other part of it is understanding your opponent's Pokemon, because you might have different Pokemon that have different strategies, and some of them are going to work better or worse against your opponent's Pokemon. So there's a lot to think about, but let's park that and now get further into our experiences playing the game.
So I want to touch on the theme integration, because coming into this, I was like, oh, it's probably just going to be, if you know the IP, you know some of the Pokemon, and that's kind of cute. This is highly, highly thematic, both in the gameplay of it, so the actual powers and the actual connection between what the type of Pokemon is and the type of damage that it does, or how it does whatever attack or ability that it does. All of that is actually quite thematic. Same with the stadiums, and same with just the experience of having, like, you're choosing, your active Pokemon. You're going, I choose you. And then you're having your bench ones. When that one gets knocked out, they go back into their Pokeball, and someone else has to go in and take that active spot. So all of that feels pretty thematic. The same with every time you have a battle, as soon as you finish a battle, you go, now I know what I need to do next. I need a way of getting more energies, or getting energies out faster, or I need a better way of doing. So that starts giving you focus of going, okay, well, what supporters could I use, or what? And now that I've started to watch the series, so I've gone back and started to watch from like season 1. So many of the storylines, like, that is the same stresses and like anxieties and like life lessons of humility often that the trainers and Ash learns along the way, going, oh, I really should have done this, or I can't believe, my Pokemon got knocked out when I thought it was so strong. So that is incredibly, incredibly thematic.
Okay, so where are we at now, and what is all this stuff around us? I want to talk you through our collection a little bit, and I want to start there with the collecting element of it. So if we put this deck away, I'm going to get out a couple of my albums just to showcase to you how I've organized my collection and what it consists of, because it's been a pretty fun journey for the collecting element. The first part is Japanese cards. So of course there are localized versions of each card. The Pokemon TCG did start in Japan, and so there's, of course, it's so huge in Japan collecting cards. But of course, my Japanese is not strong enough to actually play in Japanese. So these are purely for collection. So there's a type of card that is called an art rare, or an illustration art rare. And you can see that this is pictures of Pokemon, or Pokemon and their trainers, and they take up the whole card. These are relatively new and definitely the focus of some of the newer sets. And you can see just how beautiful these are. So
stunning. Stunning.
They are so stunning. Now, as you can see, I do have multiples of each card, and that's not because I've been ripping thousands of packs. I've also been looking for things like bulk buys at auctions and things like that. So, I love that kind of chase element of it. And so I've organized all these, and you can just see how beautiful these cards are. And what's interesting is, as you start to collect these, you do get to know the artists. So there are famous artists in Japan. And when you see a card like this, you recognize the style. And then you can even go online and look at what other cards they've created. So I really do love that art element of it. I'm not even a themer, but I do enjoy the beauty of it.
It is like, and so often with board games, we talk about the aesthetic of a game and the artwork. And it's like, this is just like by the truckloads. A big disclaimer though, you're seeing a lot of extremely, like, what are fairly rare cards. So you're not going to be pulling all of these in any one given pack. Usually it'll take maybe like 10, 15 packs to get one of these full art types. A lot of these have been bought directly, so you can in trades or from shops, or as Amy said, as part of like a bulk auction.
Yeah, and so a lot of these came from bulk, and also Japanese cards are not as popular in English-speaking markets. pockets because they're really just to collect and not to play with. So, they are cheaper. And so a lot of the time, sometimes they're more expensive, but the cheaper ones, there's art rares like this that is a lot cheaper to buy in Japanese than in English. And so I don't mind having the Japanese versions of the cards. It helps me practice my Japanese as well. And all of the Pokemon actually have different names in Japanese than they do in English, which I find fascinating. So I've got quite a few art rares, as you can see. And then I have, different Pokemon kind of collectibles, and then a lot of the playing cards that are just in Japanese. Here you can see all of the trainer art rares that I've got in Japanese as well, as some other Pokemon. So the interesting thing as well is that the boxes of Japanese Pokemon cards are a lot cheaper than English cards, but also the quality is really, really high. And people always talk about Japanese cards as being the best quality overall. And even though there's fewer cards in each pack, if you just like ripping open packs and you want to find like some of these beautiful cards, it is a cheaper way to do that. So we have enjoyed opening some Japanese cards as well as English, but the more we've gotten into playing the game, the more I've kind of switched to collecting the English version of cards. And so this is my other binder. Oh, I should also mention the type of binder that I have here.
Oh, yes, because it's not your regular binder.
Yeah, this is not a regular binder. Maggie will show you a regular binder in a moment. This is what's called a top loader album. And so cards can be protected. For example, here is a very valuable card. This card's probably worth $100 or so. And I pulled this card, again, very, very uncommon, and we do not recommend you just keep ripping to find cards like this. But I happened to open or pull this card from Maggie's first ETB. So the very first box.
So it actually technically was a second one that I was actually chasing, because it's the Crown Zenith series. There's so many different sets. There was this one set, and it was
that's right.
It was pinned to be the one that has the best pull rate. So the one that has the best rate of getting full art ones. And so I was looking for it, and they become super expensive. And we went to this trade show, and they had this one last leftover box, and I'm like, I'll have it, because it was actually pretty cheap, because now I knew the prices of those.
And it was down the rabbit hole.
The last pack of that box.
Yeah, and so it was actually what's known as a Pokemon Center exclusive. So just as a side note, there are Pokemon Centers which are the official Pokemon stores that are located throughout the world, a lot of them in Japan. And basically, they release Pokemon products for the TCG that are exclusive to their stores, and often they are marked or they're special in some way. And so that was the set that Maggie had been looking for, and then found at this swap meet that we went to. But anyway, back to the cards. So the cards, once you find some kind of valuable card, you put it in a usual penny sleeve, or the sleeves we use in board gaming. And then you can put it in a top loader sleeve like this, which is hard plastic to really protect it. And this folder that I have is actually by an Australian company, but basically it holds the top loaders. And so you can see my most valuable cards I've tried to put here in this set. So I really love Pikachu as well. I know that it's so basic when it comes to Pokemon.
It's the main mascot.
He is the main one, but no one ever likes the main one.
Thematically, Pikachu often either is just no help in the series or saves the day.
Yeah.
In the game, in the actual trading card game, it seems to be one of the weaker ones.
He's a collectible.
Intentionally make it one of the weaker ones.
Yeah, but I want to show a couple of cards. I love this Eevee. That looks really derpy. We love this card here. The Tatsugiri is a beautiful card from a recent set. And this one is from the most recent set, this Beware card, which is just so cute. So you can see the artwork is really beautiful. I'll skip ahead because now we'll probably start talking about, firstly, here's my trainer collection. I love the trainers.
The trainers
Not
are pretty
everybody
cool.
does.
Yeah, I like them too. Yeah.
But now we move into the cards that are designed for play. And we'll start with some of the more valuable cards. So there are cards called ace cards. These cards, you can only have one in every deck, and they all have quite strong OP'd kind of powers.
Overpowered.
And so, I keep these here because actually they're, some of them are a little bit more valuable, but when we do need them, we will play with these because,
we do have a secret box. I need one for one of my decks.
of those.
Yes.
And then there are EX Pokemon, which are currently, some of the stronger Pokemon. And those, you do need a lot of those to make different types of decks. So then I've got them all here organized and ready to go. So when we feel like creating a new deck that might be psychic focused, or it might be, dragon focused.
They're often focused around a particular Pokemon. So it's like there's a particular Pokemon or a couple of Pokemon that work well together, and then everything else is supporting those attacks or those abilities.
Yeah, so I have all of those in here as well to make it just easy that we can go in and grab them. But if we're not going to use them, then at least it keeps them in good condition. Then I have some more English art rares, but now you can see the full extent of the collecting. So when it comes to less valuable cards, and that is the bulk of cards, let's be honest.
Yes.
We can talk about how we organize that. Oh, your collection.
Yes. So
Maggie's
this is how I started. So when I started, I was like, I just want to pick one set. So I actually picked a set called Paldean Fates. And then I actually wanted to get every single card. And the reason you see double ups is because some of them are holographic. So it's the normal one and then the holographic. And so I wanted to try and aim to get every single card of the set. And so that's another kind of fun thing because it's very satisfying where you're completing that set. It's a lot cheaper to start ripping some packs and get yourself started, and then possibly go on eBay or to your local shop to fill in the gaps. Because a lot of times it's
especially for the basic Pokemon.
Especially for these sort of cards where they're
they're super cheap at game stores. You can go and that's where you see the boxes that you can rummage through and find all the ones you want. Pick them up really cheap. Like
I do unfortunately have some gaps where you start getting into like these shiny ones are like so expensive, and and some of these ones there's an incredible Mew. That is just too expensive. But this is one way.
But I did want to say about why Maggie has stopped doing this. And that's because it says on here that there's 91 cards to collect in the series. Like there's a number that says this is 25 out of 91. But the reality is there's all these hidden cards. So there could be up to 200, 300 cards. And then there's different variations of each card.
This sort of came with the the Elite Trainer box. I believe so. Yeah, with the Elite Trainer box, it comes with your player guide that actually has the full list. So you can actually, some information about the cards, but then it also has the full list, where are you? Of all the cards that are in that set. So you can actually be ticking, and this one has a holographic version, or this one has 2 different versions of holographic and reverse holographic and whatnot. But you can see that there's way more, because everything that then becomes rare or a secret is like it's in addition to, so it's sort of beyond the count for them.
So we have stopped doing this because this is actually it is a hard thing to do, but what's interesting about the hobby and when it comes to collecting is everybody has their different thing that they're interested in. And some advice we got early on was to really focus on one type of collecting. So for example, if you want to just collect Japanese trainers, then do that. Or if you want to just collect one type of Pokemon. So a lot of people will be like, I just want Snorlax and I want the Snorlax from every set. And so you can focus on one Pokemon and make an album, or you can focus on
Pikachu and Charizard tend to be the 2 most common that people want to have the one in every single set, and so they tend to be. Eevee's also becoming one of those that
So what about the other albums that we have for playing?
I've got an album. So this is our playing album that is literally just cards for playing. So these are all the different decks, for decks. All of the different stadiums are organized there, and then you also have all the different items. So items and tools are there. So then you can kind of have a look. There's websites where they have the full list for all the different decks, and then you go, I need one of these. You go shopping in your own little binder, and inevitably, no matter how many you have, you're like, I'm missing this card. How could that possibly be? And then you have all of your trainers as well. So then it's like all of the different trainers.
But all of these cards are really cheap to grab and
individually,
as long as you're going to lots of different stores and buying them secondhand, and every time you have the opportunity to do so, you're rummaging through and being like, I do need more of those. And of course, because you can only ever have 4 in one deck, it means that at any given time, Maggie and I really only need 8 of each type of card. And a lot of items and supporters get used more than others. So you can just focus on the ones that appear most in really powerful decks. And so what's interesting is we have been rummaging through trying to find these cards, and every new city that we go to, we've been running away to different TCG, and especially in Melbourne as well, going and hitting up all the stores and just looking at what they have in their bulk supply and picking up those cards. So what you've seen here is like 4 months of rummaging.
Yes.
And sometimes, because those cards are so not valuable, like they were cents. You might have a stack of this that you pull out, and the person just looks at it behind the counter and just like, I don't know, $5, $10.
And you're like,
for the whole stack,
Yeah.
and you're like, great, because as we mentioned, a lot of people just collect and they don't play. So for the most part, that is garbage for
them,
for people who collect, because it's not worth
One man's trash, another man's treasure.
And so even at Gen Con, so the footage you didn't see of Gen Con was every time we had a spare moment and no one was looking, we were rummaging through Pokemon cards. So maybe you spotted us doing a little bit of that at the convention. Of course, we were mostly focused on board games, but we did pick up a few cards there as well. And so it's been really fun. And if you're a kind of person who just likes organizing things, there's something about this hobby as well that is kind of like nice to just organize everything.
Well, nice, and also can be quite stressful because there's so many cards.
There are so many
that
cards.
Then you go, what's the best way to organize them? There isn't really any one way, and all of the different sets, there's double ups, and so there isn't. So the way that I've started to organize them is first by type. So I've started, and there's so many. So I actually have three different binders. This is binder 1, which is only 2 or 3 types. So this has dragon types, which I then organize by Pokédex number. So it's just, it's like, this is hours and hours of sorting entertainment, if you like that sort of thing. So I think in this one I've got, I've also got the grass type, and the reason I've got gaps is because I know that there's other cards that will inevitably end up coming in here. I've got water type here as well, but and then I have a couple of other folders for the other types.
And I admire that, because that takes a lot of patience.
It does.
But the other part of other accessories and things you can see here, obviously there's play mats. The play mats feature different characters, and we have play mats really not for the collectability element, but this is really to play with. It's ideal to have some kind of play mat. And also in the different boxes that you get damage counters. They're generally plastic, but you can see some special boxes do have metal damage counters as well, which I have here. The other thing is deck boxes. So you can get different types of deck boxes to store.
Where's the you had your so this one was the one that came with the other Elite Trainer box.
And at the moment I have this gold one. And why do we have nice deck boxes and play mats and damage counters? Well, because we've actually started playing in a local league. So that is the next thing that we want to talk about, is we decided to, with our friend who got us into this deep rabbit hole, we decided to go with him to a local game shop and take part in their Pokemon tournament. And there are different levels of Pokemon tournaments. And so the biggest one is Pokemon Worlds, which happens once per year at a particular location. The last one was in Hawaii, for example. And that is a really graded event that you need to get into or work your way up towards by playing in local regional tournaments. But we're playing in the lowest rung of that, which is essentially just a tournament for fun. It's not as strict as other tournaments because, in a real tournament, they will check each of your cards, make sure they're sleeved correctly, that you've got the right number of cards in, that they're not marked.
You have to submit a full deck list, so you can't be swapping your cards in between games or
very,
anything
very
like that.
formal. But we've just started playing in a very friendly local tournament where every Thursday night they have this tournament, and anyone who turns up, which is usually a very small group of people, less than 10 generally, and now we've got another couple of friends who are into it, so there's 5 of us and maybe 5 other people. And then they do a bracket tournament essentially, where you are matched up randomly with other players, and then it's the best out of 3, and each match takes 1 hour. So generally you play 3 people over 3 hours. So it's a lot of time and energy that goes into this. And then it's best out of 3. And interestingly, as long as you take part in at least one of these types of local tournaments, you do get a pack of cards that is a special tournament pack.
I will show it like this.
They become very collectible. So of course, Pokemon know what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. So usually I'll show you a usual pack is going to be something like this. So this is from the Twilight Masquerade set, and then you get all these different cards, and usually you have like a couple of holographic cards that come in there, or some full art rares. So some of those are some of the ones that you can win, but these are the really special ones. So you get these prize packs. You can only get these by participating in these tournaments, and the difference between them is it's usually going to be cards that are really good for playing, and they also come marked with that little icon there.
Play Pokemon stamp.
Play Pokemon stamp, which actually makes them more valuable, which again makes you kind of go, oh. But if I do ever need to, like, if I ever want to trade it or sell it, it's even more valuable than having the same card, but not with that stamp.
Yeah, so some people just compete to get those because they sell for like $20 just for the pack. But anyway, that's not why we do it. We go and we've been playing. But what's interesting, and I want to talk about the process of what's happened since we've been playing in these local tournaments, is that you're playing against very experienced players who have usually been in the hobby for much longer than you have. And what you start to find is that you go up against, well, first you get absolutely destroyed. So you learn very quickly that your deck is not powerful enough. So we were playing just between friends, and sometimes each of us was winning and sometimes not. But when you start to play against people who take it more seriously, you realize how quickly they can get up and running and how quickly they can knock out all of your Pokemon. So definitely we were losing a lot. And then you discover what's called a meta deck, which is essentially the decks that people are playing with at the very top level of the game. So people who are winning world championships with, what have they created and what's working well in terms of synergy between different Pokemon, which of course bumps up the value of the cards that are in that deck or the Pokemon that are in that deck, because suddenly all the players want to emulate how powerful that deck is. So what happens is everyone starts playing with similar decks, and there are different versions of that. So maybe it's the top 10 of the decks that are, being played in the world championships. You start seeing a lot of commonalities. And
there's the Gardevoir deck, the Chimpao deck, the Regidrago deck, and
Charizard deck.
The Charizard EX deck.
But at first I was like, well, that is really boring. Like going up against, doesn't that take all the fun out of the hobby? That's the first thing I thought. Is like, if you're just everyone's playing the same thing, isn't it then just about who has the most powerful deck? But the more we play the game, the more you realize that because you remove some cards out as prize cards, because it depends on what you draw, because it depends on the experience of the player and how quickly they know what they need to beat your particular deck, that there are so many variables that go into winning or losing, even if someone has a really powerful meta deck. The other thing is that people always think they can make a meta deck better, including ourselves. And so you're always tinkering with it, because you go up against, you win a few games with a deck, and then you go up against a deck that has a particular combination that is really good against your deck. And so you're like, well, in order to, if I go up against that again, what kind of card do I need in my deck to mitigate against that risk? And so, but because you only have 60 cards in your deck, everything you take out is important.
Everything counts.
Everything counts. Oh. And so actually what's really interesting is, one, we've tried to work our way towards the metas by, of course, getting those powerful combinations of Pokemon, but then even realizing that tweaks and things people do, or just the sheer luck of the draw, can really change who wins a match. So even though there are these metas and people get frustrated, I will say the only problem is if you are new into this, you'll probably just get absolutely destroyed. But
so just expect that. And
expect that.
And that pans with the series, the IP. They all want to, be the best and work their way up, and they're all looking up to the trainers that have incredibly powerful Pokemon. And it actually, the more I kind of watch the series now, go back and watch it, the more I play, it's like, this feels very similar, where you're like, wow, how did you do that? And So that's part of it. One other thing that I wanted to talk about, like these playing with these meta decks, is they become almost like their own full game because you're learning how does this particular deck play, and they all have very different strategies. So what I love about this game as a whole is that the rules are fairly straightforward and simple. The entire creative element of this game is in the constructing those decks, learning how to play them, learning how to tweak them. And often, I might I'll copy a meta deck and then be like, these cards are here for no reason. Like, these cards are not, I'm going to take them out and put something else that's better. And then I find myself in situations where I'm like, I see why they had included that card. This is the exact situation where you'd want that. And so much of it becomes around mitigation. So mitigating and finding ways of getting yourself out of trouble for all the different things that you might encounter. And I really, really, really enjoy that.
You often feel like your back is against the wall
Yes.
and you're just like, how am I going to get out of this situation?
But you do. You sometimes come back from the brink and it's like you just go, oh, maybe if I play this sequence. And so it can actually get incredibly strategic and just, it just has moments of incredible satisfaction where you feel so clever, and sometimes you just feel like, oh no, what just happened? So it's got both.
So overall, what have we learned? So firstly, what have we learned about TCGs?
Trading card games in general.
Trading card games. The first swap meet we went to, so we went to this big event in Melbourne that was all about Pokemon cards, and it was interesting and overwhelming. But every stall that I went to, I said, we're board gamers, like, what would you recommend for getting started in the Pokemon TCG? And every single person said don't.
Just don't get started. Just
Don't
don't
get
do
started.
it.
No.
You will never get out.
Which
it's
was-
a deep, deep hole. That
Yeah, which was really like, what? I would never tell people to not get into board gaming. So I was just intrigued.
Obviously, not in a nasty way, not in like a don't get out, we don't want any new people here. It was just like if you can, just don't
do it.
save yourself.
Yeah, and so, but now I understand why.
Yeah.
Because the first thing I'll say is that a lot of people are very anti-TCG, and I totally understand because there is a huge gambling element of it. And if you have an addictive personality, I would recommend you stay so far away from TCGs unless you've got endless supplies of money, because it is really at the heart of it. If you are just trying to pull rare cards, that's a false economy. You are going to spend so much money ripping in order to try and find these rare cards, which maybe are worth a fraction of what you've spent on buying packs and opening cards.
Yeah.
So that side of things has really died down for us. The same, we got into the hobby and we got into this really, really intensely, but, have quickly learned. So let us be the learning for you, that if that is something that you would struggle with, then definitely I understand why they said don't get into it, because it is this deep kind of lure of
and very, very, very addictive.
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of like you kind of need, it's like, okay, now just one more pack. Like, I'll just rip one more blister pack and maybe that'll be the one.
Yeah. And so also the lure of like the, get rich quick, definitely like that is not the case in this hobby. The only saving grace is that, we know that we could probably offload a lot of this to other collectors at some point, which we absolutely will, and I intend to do.
And even with that, it's like sometimes you can sell things back to stores and they might give you store credit. That's always going to be at a loss, because obviously they have to buy things a lot cheaper so that they can then resell them.
Yeah.
But we have done like eBay businesses in the past, so it's like we know that we can or have and do the secondhand kind of selling thing.
Yeah,
So,
and we obviously sell board games and things like that too.
Yeah.
So we're kind of familiar. We're definitely, knew our limits. So the first thing is just like, know your limits, and that's what I've learned with TCGs, and definitely the way that people frame it on YouTube about investing and things, I would take all of that with a grain of salt. The second part of it that I want to talk about is just the level of expense. It is really, really expensive.
It adds up super quickly. Yeah.
And I want to explain one part of why that is. Of course, there is people just buying things to rip them. If you're just in it to buy the cards you want secondhand, it doesn't have to be that expensive.
Yeah.
So the really expensive part is if you just get lured in by the new sets and that type of thing. But I do want to talk about the way that Pokemon keeps you in the game, because every few months there is a new set, and they are getting closer and closer together now. For example, there is a new set coming in September, and then are just about to launch now. And then there's another new set that's dropping in November.
Yeah, it's usually every couple of months there's a new set.
Yeah.
So that's another like 90 plus cards.
Yeah, and so there's these new cards, and that is really interesting from a gamer perspective because the new cards always have new abilities that might interact in the deck that you've been building for a long time in new and interesting ways. And so it really is exciting from how is the game going to change. Of course, there's also new collectible cards that people get excited about. But so you'll have these new sets come out. But then the clever thing that Pokemon does is they retire cards. And so
From playing. So for the playing,
yes. And so cards no longer become legal in tournament after a certain amount of time. So for example, early next year, there is the cards that are marked with an F. They are all going to go out of rotation, and a lot of those cards are used in the meta decks. And so, you know, now you need to find replacements for those cards in the newer set. So they keep you buying, and it's really, really smart. But also, you know, it's both good and bad because it keeps it fresh and interesting because there's always new cards with new abilities that are coming out.
New combinations that you're going to be able to now do, and all of a sudden a deck that was okay, all of a sudden it's like super powerful because there's this one new card.
And likewise, they always try and neutralize things that have become too strong in the meta or in championships. So they will introduce a card that all of a sudden brings a really powerful deck to its knees. So there are really interesting ways that the game is dynamically changing, but don't be fooled. This is also a marketing tactic to keep people buying because they have to keep people buying.
And that's not just with the Pokemon. That's most trading card games. Like that's the way they work and that's how they function. So we talked a lot about how expensive it can be, but the reality is you can get into it at a fairly like lower cost entry.
Well, you can try it.
You can try, try and see if it's something that you're going to enjoy because there are those ready-made battle decks that, for example, in Australian dollars, you can get between $15 to $20, and that's a ready-to-play deck. And there are some like Build and Battle, I think it's called Build and Battle Stadiums, which is just 2 decks that are like that. And they're also a fairly accessible entry point, same cost as any like medium-sized board game. That'll allow you to explore it, see if you enjoy the mechanics of it, and then go, okay, well, maybe I'll go some of the other steps and look into other bits.
Yeah, but what have we learned about ourselves? So we've learned a lot about TCGs. What have we learned about ourselves? I think one thing that we've learned about ourselves is if you watch our channel, you'll know that we don't always love like super aggressive competitive behavior. Yes, we love competitive board games, but in board gaming, it's not often that it's a direct head-to-head, I'm going to take you down at whatever cost. And because of the nature of this game, it is like you're trying to knock out your opponent. Because we've been playing in local tournaments, because you're like, everything you're doing is geared at destroying your opponent.
Taking down your opponent.
It definitely has that vibe. So if that is not for you, that is quite confronting. And it's even more confronting when you play with strangers. And I've been having a very mixed relationship with that because you're playing just like you usually have curated a group of friends to play board games with who have a similar approach to board gaming as you do. Maybe if you're not into people who are like very mean around the table. Well, everyone kind of knows board gaming etiquette, or maybe you are, but you know, that's known. Whereas for me, and I don't enjoy that kind of mean-spirited gaming, I think going up against a stranger and you're not sure how they're going to be, and most players have been generally very lovely and fine, but it is like very intimidating. And I actually found that when I was playing in tournament, I'd get quite stressed. I'm quite stressed about losing, quite stressed about winning, quite stressed in general about the dynamic as well socially and how friendly to be. And, you know, and when you win, like, it's just, or when you lose, just all of it. And so it is like, I found it very intimidating. I'm not sure if it's for me longer term, to be honest.
I surprisingly had a slightly different experience to that in that I usually deeply dislike head-to-head, my entire purpose is to take you down type games. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to enjoy a game like this. I think the only outlier has been a game like Radlands. And I still couldn't even say like, why is it that I enjoy that so much? With this, I realized I think the reason I enjoy it is one, I love the artwork. I love, you kind of do connect with like, oh, I want to play this one Pokemon or that one Pokemon. But also there's so much focus on the strategy and I find it so intriguing how things sort of play and how creative you can get with the decks that there's an enough that I almost I don't care. It's fine if, sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. It's fine if I lose most of the time. I'm intrigued in how it plays out and how all these different decks play out.
Yeah.
When it's come to that face-to-face with strangers, my experience so far has been like they've all been very. You have different levels of emotional intelligence etiquette. Let's say with and this happens with with people in general, particularly with a lot of gamers in general.
Yeah.
But I've found a lot of really warm people. Like as soon as you say, look, I'm really new to this, so if I make a mistake, just let me know. I've had people who have been very, very friendly, and even at the end of the game, or even sometimes midway, going, you probably might want to play that, or like. This is how your deck, could play or could be boosted. And then it's like, so every gaming experience has actually been more of like a learning experience. And we've actually even been like, one of the friends that we bring is a younger, sort of like a teenager. And the people have been really welcoming and even going, hey, next time if you come in, I'll bring some extra cards that I'm happy to gift you.
Yeah.
And so that's been really lovely as a welcoming kind of,
Actually, side note, we didn't talk about trading because trading is a huge part of this hobby, but I am way too intimidated and I don't know the values of cards enough to engage in the trading aspect. But if you like that as well, when you go to a tournament, people do bring their folders with them. And so there is that exchanging in between matches, people looking at albums. So it is really friendly in that sense. I think that for me, the realization about myself is that it triggers a part of me that I try and suppress most of the time. So I am a very competitive person generally, but I think throughout the course of being in board gaming now for 10 years. So being in board gaming for 10 years, I feel like the longer we've stayed in board gaming, the less I've cared about winning and the more I care about teaching and making sure people enjoy the game around the table. I still try and win, but it's just not important to me. And this really makes you want to win. And I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with is just reconciling the things that I've tried to shed.
I initially went into it going, I know that this is something that I really struggle with, the head-to-head thing. I don't enjoy when my objective is to take the other person down. So it's almost like it was like a personal challenge of going, I want to put myself in this situation and kind of frame what this could be. And so I just go into every game going, I'm very likely going to lose. So I'm more invested in going, I want to see how my deck plays now, and I want to see what happens with the other deck. So it's almost like the stakes are not on who's going to win or who's going to lose. It's like, I'm assuming I'm going to lose. My focus is on, wow, look at how this played out.
Yeah, I think it's the element for me of adding a prize. So, and that's why I've never played competitive gaming tournaments because, that idea of having a prize makes the focus on the win so much stronger. I want to win so I can win a better prize. Yeah. And
I'm happy with the consolation prize. I love that you get a consolation prize no matter what. Even if you lose every game, you get your packs. You're like...
The other thing we've realized is we don't have time for this, honestly. In order to do this well, this hobby, we would have to dedicate so much time. And as it is, it's probably been distracting us a little bit away from our board game. I think we're still playing a lot of board games, of course, but now we're also playing Pokemon, and it's a lot. And a weekly tournament is a lot on top of our video schedule, on top of everything else. And it's
our jobs, our lives,
our full-time jobs. And so, I think that what are we going to do from here? We'll probably continue dabbling in Pokemon because it's fun and it's actually fun to tinker with the deck.
And people that watch the channel, I love art and I love the artwork, and they're just getting better with the new artwork that's coming out and all the new sets. So I know that of the upcoming sets, I'm always going to get at least a few packs to rip if there's a set, because you can often see all the cards that are going to be in a set. I might try and keep doing the whole I'll make for that one set, I'm going to try and get at least the basic cards.
All of them.
Basic cards.
That's not dabbling in the hobby. That's pretty deep.
Yeah, it's like finding your joy and your space within what is a very, very big hobby.
It's we will retain the things that, creating joy, and the things the other things that are not giving us that much joy. I think we have too much stuff now. I personally feel like I have too much stuff now.
Definitely need to sell some stuff.
I definitely want to be selling some stuff. So I'm going to be doing a huge cull. It was fun, the process of learning how to value items and what things are worth. And now I can pretty much walk into a store and recognize when something is priced well, because that's how deep and how fast.
She loves a bargain hunt. We're like,
But that is
very
a good,
cheap.
I'm pretty sure that's a good price on that card. Look it up, and yes, it is. And so to get from where we were 4 months ago, knowing nothing about really Pokemon or TCGs, to being where we are now, to walk into a shop and be like, I know that's important, or that's good in this deck, or whatever. I feel like we have just accelerated our way through this hobby. And that's why we wanted to share it on here. A lot of people are not going to be interested in this content, but because it's been such a big part of our last 4 months, we wanted to like share it with you. And to be honest, the most fun we've had in this hobby is because 4 of our friends are now really into it too, just because they've gotten into it and they're coming to the local tournament with us. And that is just the best, because it just gives you another thing to talk about, another way to engage with people.
Yeah.
And I feel like because they're into it, we'll probably still play.
We'll definitely keep doing casual gaming between us, and I will still enjoy going to the casual, league night, because you don't have to commit to a particular, like you can just drop in one evening.
Yeah.
I don't see us ever going to Worlds. I would like to try one of the regionals at some point, just for the sake of even if I, which I very likely will, just be disqualified first round, that's fine by me. But yeah, it's just an experience.
It. And it is like an experience. So like getting into the subculture of a different hobby is so fascinating to us. And we do it often, especially Maggie, like going into different hobbies. And this has just been, like, it's been really fun and something that we can share together as well.
Yeah.
So we wanted to share it with you. The time commitment is probably, something that we'll have to balance out. And I definitely think the gambling element of it, I've moved past that. And so...
And I'll also say, from an environmental impact, I do not enjoy the fact, all the foil that gets generated from the packs. We don't, in Australia at least, I don't really know of a good way of recycling that. Same with with the packs. Some of the packs have a lot of plastic in them, and we don't, I think at the moment, we don't have a good way of recycling those fine plastics. The cardboard, no problem. But that's one thing that is if TCGs can get better at that part of it, that would make, I think, a huge impact.
Yeah, and so we have retreated back mostly to the safety of our board games. I am especially, now that when I sit down and play a board game.
I'm still in this. Yeah.
I have a really renewed appreciation for board games and their longevity and the things that I get out of it. It's just a different version of collecting, a different hobby. But I've really enjoyed my time with this, and I'll continue to play. Don't worry. I'm going to continue to play and probably try to beat Maggie at all times. But it has been, really fun, and we just wanted to share that with you. We'd love if you could share your experiences with TCGs with us in the comments. Good, bad, hopefully we've touched on the positives and the negatives of TCGs, but overall, we're really glad that we gave this a go and that we found something that inspired us to give it a go. So thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But bye for now.
Bye.